It's good to see you all. I see my counter has started right on time. Um, I'm really honored to be here. I moved to New York in 1987, and B&H was my second home. And at that time, it was a little tiny, almost, I don't want to diminish its importance, but it was kind of a little hovel. And a lot of the stuff was downstairs, and there was boxes of paper everywhere. And at that time in my life, I calculated all of my earnings by how much photo equipment I could get. So if I did a job for $200, I'm like, I can buy a box of Vectolure for $59, which is a Kodak paper that's no longer made, and a brick of Tri-X or whatever it was. So B&H has always been a thing for me. So I'm really, and now we buy everything through B&H, obviously virtually. But I wanted to start with this image. This is Nicéphore Niepce's photograph in 1826, 1827 of the courtyard on the back of his house. It's the first known photograph, the oldest surviving photograph made. And the reason I show it is, I feel like it's very important for us to sort of acknowledge where we came from. Also, it was made in 1826, 1827, so we're coming up on 200 years of image making. And I think that if we can, in our lifetime or in our sort of, path as photographers, generate an image that is relevant to the long history of the medium, I think we're doing very well. Those kind of home runs are incredibly elusive. When I was in high school, we had this book in the darkroom. We had a darkroom in the science building at my high school, a little tiny high school. And we had this book there about early photography, and this Stieglitz image, which I consider to be one of my favorite images of all time, Winter Fifth Avenue, really, really struck me. And it kind of informed, at that time, it kind of informed what photography could be for me. The idea of like that fleeting moment and all those elements like perfectly aligned and not overlapping with one another, and the fury of the storm, and et cetera. So I always want to give honor to Stieglitz, who was one of the great pioneers of photography. He also was doing photography in the streets at a time when people were shooting large format glass plates on tripods. He was using a Fulmer and Schwing 5x7 reflex camera. So he was hand holding in 1882. I think he made this photograph. I'd have to check. But anyway, so that's just a little bit of kind of what I wanted to share with regards to inspiration, early inspiration. Of course, as photographers, when we start out, we all try to emulate like what other photographers have done. So, we can, and I really support that, because I think what we do is it helps us to find our way. It helps us to find our own voice. I think that there's a lot of people talk about style and photographic style, and I like to think of kind of my approach to photography more of the sensibility route. So it's like, if you're hired to do a job, it's almost like you're hired for your opinion. So it's like, X rocket launch, go. And like you go and you give your opinion and you return with your opinion. And so I think that holds a lot more water than the idea of style, which I think is a much more sort of based in artifice. But I was trying to emulate everyone from Joel Peter Witkin to Cartier-Bresson or Ray Metzger, or et cetera, et cetera, and ultimately got a job at a newspaper, and was a full-time newspaper photographer for almost 3 years, 35,000 daily in California. I was doing photo essays, and the storytelling aspect of photography is still very near and dear to my heart. I'll share some stories a little bit later that are more recent. But I realized what I was doing when I was shooting these kind of photo essays is I was trying to emulate what I was seeing in magazines. And I started taking lighting with me and doing things that were very unconventional for like a newspaper photographer in that time. This would have been the mid-'80s. And I knew the path was going to be toward magazines, towards assignments that were more fleshed out, that you could spend more time on. You had more creative control, especially in the mid-'80s. There was a lot of really exciting things going on in the magazine world at that time. But, at the same time, everything was analog, running my own film, making all my own prints, worked in the darkroom. I've worked many thousands of hours in darkrooms, still have darkrooms at my houses, and love that process still. But absolutely love digital. And I shot 4x5 for many, many years, and it was really slow to the digital game because I was so used to the quality I was getting with 4x5. But I feel like we're at that point now where I don't miss it at all. You know, shooting with a 100 megapixel camera is like the cleanest, most beautiful giant file, and then with the ability to up-res, et cetera, it's not any kind of compromise. It's better for the environment. I just think it's a better thing. So I started getting magazine assignments, and this is Denzel Washington, and it was one of those things where I realized early on, this is after I moved back to LA. I was in New York for 4 years, 91, and I was getting frustrated with these assignments where it was like, okay, you have 2 hours and it has to be in Hollywood somewhere. And like the environment or the world that I imagined didn't exist probably anywhere, but I kind of imagined, I was looking at this Bernie Imes book and called Juke Joint, and there are all these photographs of like back rooms in sort of juke joints in Mississippi. And I was like, man, I wish there was a world like that here that I could shoot Denzel in. So I just built one and ended up building a forced perspective set and then shooting him in it. And if there was ever a moment in my career where I really noticed the ripple effect from a single image, I would say this is that moment. There have been a few, but it was kind of like that old adage that car companies use about race on Sunday, buy on Monday. So, you know, if their car does well, people are flocking to the dealers on the day after the race kind of thing. That's an old sort of like auto adage, but this is one of those things where this ran on Sunday in the New York Times Magazine and the phone was like ringing off the hook the next day as a result of the image. So I was able to actually see sort of like the fruits of my labor in a very, very immediate way. You know, we do a lot of set building, like Gabe said. You know, these environments don't exist really in LA. I really wanted to shoot Helen in kind of a Parisian atelier, and so I designed the set and we built it. This is a very big set, actually. I had my crew with me on this one. The Denzel I built by myself, but you know, trying to imagine these worlds and then inhabit it with the subject, you know, and then like my direction to her was imagine yourself floating across the floor. And so she just kind of came up with this beautiful little like poetic thing. I think I only shot 22 sheets of film on this after a 2-day build and, you know, 3 hours of hair and makeup. It was just like, okay, I got it. I did a tighter shot of her as well after, but for this big wide shot, you know, I felt really confident. I feel like I'm really good at knowing when it's working, which I think is a really important skill. I mean, it's a part of the editing process, really, because you're editing the world when you're shooting, right? So to be really conscious when you're shooting of like, you know, and I'll actually say this to my subject, you know, I'll say, okay, it's okay, we're good. Okay, it's happening right now. Okay, the picture's happening right now. Let's like stay super focused. Okay, chin down a tiny bit. Good, hold that. This is working. Good, good, good. You got it. And it's like, okay, we got it. And that's so important. And it's so important for subjects to perceive that you're like in control and that you're really present and understanding what's happening with, you know, their cooperation. So I do feel like that's a really important thing. Leo, this is a shot out at in Staten Island, out at the old fort. I can't remember the name of the fort, but we shot it out there. I'm just going to kind of go through some of these portraits because, you know, as grateful as I am of these shooting personalities, and as grateful as I am that I've met so many people in my career, I don't define myself through like association. You know, I look at it, I'm a photographer, you know, I could be like doing anything other than photography and kind of have the same attitude. I think I would just try to do it as best I can and work as hard as I can every single time. Be really honest with myself about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, how I'm approaching things. I feel like if we do that, we're way ahead of the game because, you know, there's this notion that because digital exists and the technical barrier has been broken, that, you know, I've heard it so many times, like, oh, everybody's a photographer. You know, it's like, well, at the end of the day, what you get from a digital camera is you get an image that's sharp and exposed properly. After that, it's still image making. It's either a dynamic image or it's not. You know, the camera, the phone, none of those things, are going to make an image. You have to be an image maker. So having said that, I don't feel really that threatened by any of the technology. In fact, I think it's great that, family photos turn out better than they did when I was a kid, which was pretty terrible, actually. I'll briefly stop on this Angelina photograph because when we posted this image, like half the responses were like Photoshop, Photoshop, Photoshop. And so this is in camera. National Geographic has a very stiff policy about retouching. You have to submit your raw files when you submit the final print. They overlay it and check for any kind of pixel pushing. So this was actually done in camera. It was a very long process. A couple months I worked on it before, leading up to it, just making sure I sort of got everything organized. It's a homage to Avedon's 1980 photo of Ronald Fisher, the beekeeper that he shot for the America West. I talked to Ronald Fisher. I talked to the entomologist, Dr. Gary, who was on the shoot. Bees are attracted, and not only attracted, but they communicate through smells. And Dr. Gary had made some queen pheromone, and he sent a jar of it down to me, a little vial, and I put the queen pheromone all over Angelina's body and on her face. And when we put the ball of bees onto the reflector, there was a reflector, 4x4, right out of frame. We put a big ball of bees on that, and they just started crawling around on her. And she was just completely effortless. It was totally effortless. She never, ever once, and we shot for 18 minutes, and she never once flinched. I was very impressed by it. And, it was kind of her idea. We had this conversation. It was because Nat Geo was doing an article on this UNESCO project to train women beekeepers worldwide, and Angelina was the face of that endeavor. And so Nat Geo called me and said, hey, can you do a picture of Angelina that relates to bees? So then I called Angelina and was talking to her about it. And she said, oh, that picture of that guy with the bees all over him? And I was like, yeah, it's Ronald Fisher, Avedon, yeah, I know it. She goes, could we do something like that? And I was like, let me look into it. I want to see how feasible it is. I didn't want to be the guy that killed Angelina Jolie. So we worked it all out. We had paramedics and everything on set, and everything worked great. She actually got stung once, and it was on her way back to hair and makeup after the shoot. She was walking back, and one bee got in her boot and stung her on the calf. It was a total non-event. She was just like, oh, I think I just got stung. So it wasn't any kind of big deal. Some more set stuff with Ryan and that prop that he's looking through. I built that at my shop in Texas, and then I shipped it to LA for the shoot, and we built that environment. Same with Rachel. This picture of Tom Hanks is the most replicated photo I've ever done. I think there have been so many people that have tried to recreate it online. I find it really heartwarming that, it's a simple lighting setup. It's 3 lights, but, I think lighting is not the light, it's the nuance that we sort of finesse the light with. And that's kind of what light shaping, et cetera, is all about. It also helps to have a great subject. This was Anne Heche, who tragically died last year, or the year before. I think it was last year. But I didn't go into this shoot thinking she was going to do this. This was completely spontaneous, which I was really grateful for. Same with this one. Putting his finger in front of his right eye was a very cool little moment for Al Pacino. Laura Dern. Benedict, same thing. I built this set in Texas, shipped it to LA for the shoot. Greta is apparently the highest paid female director in history. I don't know if any of you saw Barbie, but that's her baby. Bryan Cranston, obviously one of the absolute great actors of our time. Heath was a tragic loss. kind of get through some of these portraits. I do a lot of portraits, so it's kind of normal that I would show a lot of portraits, but there's a lot of other stuff too that we want to look at. This shot of Sandy, same thing. You know, a lot of Photoshop speculation. There was a rock. This is in Fiji. There was a rock in the water, and I noticed the day before that at a certain time when the tide was coming in, the rock was slowly get covered. And so I said, hey, there's this rock, you know, I can put you on it, and then we can wait till the tide like comes up to the dress, and it'll look like you're just like floating on the water. So I carried her out there to the rock, put her on the rock, and then we just waited for the tide, maybe like 10 minutes. And right when it got to the dress line is when we shot. David Blaine, this is a couple weeks ago. It's in Rio. This is a thing where he did this, lit himself on fire and jumped off a bridge, which is just a normal day in David Blaine's life. Okay, I'm going to do a magic trick for you guys that has nothing to do with me doing the magic trick. This is the only time you've ever seen a magic trick that is only explained. But he did this thing on the plane. He goes, Dan, let me do a trick for you. And I said, okay. And he goes, cut a deck. He goes, I'm going to fan the deck, or I'm going to blow through the deck really quickly, pick a card. So he goes through it. And I said, can you do it again? He went through it again. I said, okay, I got the card. So then he shuffled the deck, and he fanned it. And he said, pick your card. And I looked, and I said, it's not in there. And he goes, look under your watch. And it was folded in 4 sections under my watch, okay? And that's not even the whole trick. That alone is amazing, right? So then I pull it out and check it, and I'm like, yep, it was King of Spades. You got me. And he goes, the first time I fanned the deck, did you pick a card? And I said, yeah, I did, but I wasn't really sure, so I wanted you to go again. He said, look at your card. And it was in my hand, the other card. I have no idea how you do that. It was the King of Hearts, and it was in my hand. So he not only, I mean, it's just mind-blowing. I have no idea how. He had my niece went with me. She was on doing an internship with me this summer, and he had her show 2 cards, 2 aces, and then he had her hold the 2 aces. He folded, pressed really hard together, and then he said, Dan, what's your favorite number between 1 and 10? And I said 7, and he said, open your hands, and it was 2 sevens. It was like, I have no idea, man. It makes you kind of want to run away from him a little bit. It's pretty incredible. So how was that magic trick, right? That's good. I showed you a magic trick without actually having to have any skill whatsoever. It's pretty good. There's going to be a whole genre of magicians that just narrate tricks that are like impossible to achieve. And now I'm cutting her head off. Anyway, Mr. Rogers, my favorite shoot of my career, I think, one of my favorite shoots. The most gentle, wonderful, at any given time during the 3 days I spent with him in Pittsburgh, so many of his employees came up to me, and this is really telling to me, and they would say, I've worked for him for 25 years. He's the kindest, most wonderful person I've ever worked for. And that's super telling, right? Because he can, I'm holding the sharp stick, right? He's on the receiving end. And for those people to kind of unsolicited come up to me meant a lot to me about his character. These are all stuff we built for Zoe. This is Zoe Graham, she's an actress. Nara, Yoshitomo Nara. This is interesting really quickly. I was in Tokyo at his studio, and I show up at the studio with my assistant, and he doesn't speak any English, and I speak no Japanese whatsoever. And so we were thinking it was going to be kind of pantomime, but the guy that was kind of the local fixer started speaking with him, and realized that he had done a sabbatical for a year in Zurich, so he spoke German, and I speak German. So I'm in Tokyo working with this Japanese artist, and we're speaking German to one another. I just thought it was like kind of a fascinating, like, I try to be really aware of what's going on when it's going on so that I have like a really like fleshed out memory of it. And when I'm shooting, like little anecdotes, like this picture of Nick, my assistant holding the dog, and like the dog's neck is literally stretching, trying to get to the stake, but it can't reach it, and there's just a guy like holding it just out of frame. Will Ferrell. Yeah, that was his idea he wanted to have a dog translator so he could talk to his dog. This is a Wired piece on, it was on technology that was promised us but never came to fruition. So he had a fembot and a food and pill form. Where's my damn jetpack? And where's my ray gun? So, I do a lot of lighting. This is all shot with strobe, all of it so far, everything I've shown you, except for that last image is available light. That one's available light. But it was incredible available light coming in through the front windows of his studio. It's David Haruni. And I really enjoy lighting, and I really enjoy the ability of lighting to transform a situation and transform a scene. Julia Butterfly, this is 186 feet up in a redwood tree, and I'm like within an inch of falling off of it, I think. And I brought light. I went by myself on this, so I climbed the tree, and then I pulled up my gear in 5-gallon buckets, and they tied a rope around some of the bigger stuff, and I brought it all up and set up lighting. And this is my second time up in the tree. I don't know if you know about her, but she spent 2 years up in this redwood, and she was she was protesting old growth logging, and so she did a tree sit. She originally went in the tree with the intention of staying for 7 days, and ended up staying for over 2 years. And amazing woman. And we talk a lot in photography. I guess it's not discussed enough probably. But the idea of the punctum, which is the punctum according to, trying to think of it wasn't Roland Barthes. Yeah, it was Barthes and Camera Lucida. Talked about this kind of secondary, maybe tertiary read that kind of elevates the photograph. And for me, her foot, like grasping that little sapling that's growing out of the tree was a really beautiful moment that I didn't even see when I was shooting it. I saw that once I'd finished. Today's Herzog's birthday, so I put him in. Happy birthday, Werner. He's 81 today. Spike Jonze, George Lucas, Chris Nolan. This is my director section. Ridley Scott. And the great film director, Steve Jobs. I mean, not Steve Jobs, but oh my God, I can't believe I said that. That's pretty hilarious, actually. Anyway, you know who I'm talking about. Because I'm drawing a blank right now. Yeah, I know. I was kidding. Walter Isaacson just shot that week before last. There's great stories for a lot of this stuff, but I feel like, to a degree, like the punctum of this image, I would say, is the tear running down her cheek, which normally hair and makeup would go in immediately and get. And I stopped her and said, just wait, let's see what happens. And it just kept going all the way down her cheek and made for it's Tamika Jones. She's an R&B singer. Eminem, of course. Robert Cray. Alicia Keys. I'm just going to kind of go. So anyway, doing lighting for me is like the artistry that I can bring to the thing to heighten it. And I really, really enjoy it. And, photography is drawing with light, right? Photographing. And so, it's a major piece, whether we find it, which I also love doing, and I'll show you some of that work, or we make it. And oftentimes, doing assignment work like this, we have to make it because we don't have the luxury of like waiting for perfect available light in a perfect, scenario. It's limited time. Not really limited time with the subject. I feel like I always get enough time, but it's like more than not, it's locations that are sort of uninspiring. It's Isaac Hayes. This is pretty funny. Foo Fighters. I don't know if you see them back there, but I don't know. I crack myself up. Morrissey. This is inspired by In Cold Blood, the Conrad Hall shot In Cold Blood. It's an incredible film, but there was a scene with Robert Blake at the end where water was running down a pane of glass and it was casting a shadow. It looked like he was crying. Like, I highly recommend seeing it, if not for the entire film, which is phenomenal, for that scene at the end. It's a totally incredible scene. Tupac. Really quickly, Tupac, what he wanted to listen to when he came to the shoot was Counting Crows. So he listened to Counting Crows 3 times all the way through, and that's how long the shoot was, so roughly an hour and a half or so. I'm going to go fast because I'm on a limited time. So this is some more like editorial sort of stories. This woman had her both hands transplanted onto her hands and was really struggling with anti-rejection drugs. And there's probably a good chance, if I looked into it, that she's maybe had them removed again, because the biggest piece with any kind of transplanting is having to be on a pretty large drug regimen to get your body to accept the transplant. This woman, Barbara Ames, she was an early AIDS victim. This is her farm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, at like 5:30 in the morning in the summer. Beekeeper, Arnold. Oddly, the theremin should be the accompaniment for my. I love theremin. It's interesting. It's Obama. Kind of interesting transformation there after 8 years. Bernie. Okay, so I'm going to blow through this aerospace stuff. I only have 12 minutes. So this is, I'm just going to talk as I go through it. So in 2012, the shuttle program was canceled. 2011, 2012, I don't know. And there were 3 orbiters that existed. There were 5 originally, but 2 met catastrophic failures. So there was Endeavour, Atlantis, and Discovery. And they remained. So I did a document on the last 3 launches of the last 3 shuttles, and then ultimately it became a book called Last Launch. I'll go through some of this stuff pretty quickly. Shuttle flight deck. It's when they're moving it to the Science Center in LA. It was amazing to watch that. I followed that for a while. It was really incredible. SpaceX launch, SpaceX landing. And this is Artemis. This is a current National Geographic project I'm on. Been on it for about 2.5 years. Part of it's running an October issue. I think it's like 16 pages. And it's all stuff that's related to the program to go to the moon that is a little behind schedule right now, but by probably 2027, there'll be a man and a woman on the moon. So these are all pieces of that project. Testing, that was a booster test. That's a booster test in Utah. The first launch was a mannequin that was wired for sort of G recording and stuff like that, but because it was untested hardware, they didn't want to put a person in it, so they put a mannequin in there. And this is the actual launch of the Artemis 1. And night launches are tricky exposure-wise, because if you think about it, the only thing lighting the rocket is like reflection from the ground, because the light source is sort of on the bottom end of the rocket, not at the top. So they're frustrating to shoot and difficult to shoot, but can be really beautiful. But I prefer day launches to this Apollo mission control. Some spacesuit stuff. That's Armstrong's flown suit that he walked on the moon in. I think one of the things I love about my job is the amount of stuff that I've been able to experience firsthand. There's one of my science editors at National Geographic, Todd James. He said something which I want everybody to really listen to, because it sums up journalism completely. And he said, how will our readers take the journey if we don't take it for them first? How will our readers take the journey if we don't take it for them first? And I felt like that really sums up sort of what we do. You know, we go out, we're like the advanced team, we bring back the goods, and then they get shared. So I kind of thought that was a really beautiful sentiment. And he made it up on the spot, too. It's not like I said, God, that should be like National Geographic's slogan, but it's not. Yeah. Just kind of like let you take a visual journey. That's the interior of Gagarin's Vostok 1, which is the first man to orbit the Earth. First man in space, actually. That's a spacesuit for a dog, which is pretty cute, I thought. The stuff in Russia is really, this is in Kazakhstan actually, but the Russian equipment is very sort of like sci-fi looking and lo-fi looking, but it's the most reliable launch vehicles ever built are the Soyuz vehicles. This is another night launch. Once again, very tricky exposure-wise, but like very satisfying having nailed the exposure. Apollo 11 hatch. Apollo 11 capsule. That's what Todd said. I worked on this piece on Apollo 11, and the capsule was one thing I really wanted to shoot, and because it's Nat Geo, once again, we can't retouch, so the entire thing is blacked out. There's black duvetine on the floors. There's like 40 feet of duvetine in the back, or 60 feet. So huge production, right? Could have been so much easier if it weren't Nat Geo, actually. Just in terms of logistics, but I was really pressing him. It was in Seattle at the time, and I was like, we got to shoot the capsule. I mean, come on, we got to shoot the capsule. And he said, yeah, I guess, yeah, okay, well, how will our readers take the journey if we don't take it for them first? And I just like, that galvanized sort of like what we do to a degree for me. Okay, so that was actually that recent SpaceX launch, that Super Heavy, the Starship, the one that blew up after 4 minutes, I think, or that they detonated after 4 minutes. The thing was crazy. We had 3 cameras totally taken out, that were closer to the pad. Just there was this flying concrete everywhere. There were vehicles parked there that were totaled. It was such a disaster. They really miscalculated, the effects that vehicle will have on the launch pad, like radically miscalculated. Anyway, okay, so some photo essays, which, I come from that world. That's like my favorite world. Probably lesser known for that work, just because, it's less of a sort of like home for it. But this is a photo essay on a World War II veteran who lived in Luling, Texas, named Ray Halliburton. And he was kind of one of those citizen soldiers, he like enlisted because he knew that he should, and he went over and he fought, and he came back, and he like never left Texas after that. He went all the way, he said he walked all the way to France, all the way to Berlin. But I felt like on some level he was more emblematic of the soldier that was in the Second World War than like the hero soldiers, like the Band of Brothers guys or whatever. So I kind of wanted to do something that celebrated sort of that demographic. So he wanted to eat the same thing every day. I can't believe he lived into his 90s, because this is like his lunch, a big red Lynx ring, they call them rings in Texas, rings of sausage, and white bread, buttercrust bread. But I noticed he did one thing when I was there. I shot that job by myself completely, and I shot the whole thing with hot lights. I didn't use any strobe at all. I went alone and worked, and it was really, really satisfying. I felt like I wouldn't be able to get genuine moments that were as genuine if I had gone about it using assistants and strobe and like more techniques. I tried to just strip it way back. But I noticed he did one thing. He would, when he sat down for food, he would like do a full-on like Albrecht Dürer kind of like prayer. And I felt like I didn't want to be invasive, but I wanted to capture that on film because I felt like it was of another time. So I set up a camera and tripod, and I lit the kitchen where he ate, lit the sort of dining table, and then I went and got the food and picked up the food and brought it back, and I set up his little meal, and then I called him. He was in another room. I said, Ray, lunch is ready. And he came in, and I just stood next to my camera, and I fired like 4 frames and then stopped shooting and captured that. And I feel like it would have been disingenuous if I was like working it, So I was like, thought it through. This is the shot. This is where the camera needs to be, et cetera, et cetera. So that worked out really well. His Bible, his bedtime. Once again, can you imagine like a couple assistants and me and strobes, and it's just like, this is 1K bounced off the 1K tungsten bounced off the ceiling of his room. He passed away 2 years ago. He was a really amazing guy. I loved him. It's a story about a guy who got arrested in West Virginia for concealing his face in public because he never goes out unless he's like dressed like the Joker. And the reason he was arrested is there's an old law in place in West Virginia. It's a Klan law. And it states that no one can be in public with their face concealed. And so he was arrested, so some, lawyer sort of glommed onto his case. Anyway, this was meant to be published in Rolling Stone, but there was a sort of a regime change there, like right when it was in the works, so it never got published, but pretty bizarre. He files his teeth, so his teeth are sharp like fangs. I don't know, it's really kind of strange. And then his girlfriend, of course, dresses like Harley Quinn, which is... I kind of viewed it when I was shooting it as like this weird 21st century love story. And that was kind of how I went about it. It's just completely like removed from any other period of time. This is some stuff in Bangladesh that I did a couple months ago. I'll just go through it really quickly because I'm running out of time. Sorry about that. This is at a shipyard in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And we just sort of documented life in the shipyard and did it through portraits, and tried to do enough environmental work to where you felt like you knew where you were, but really focused on the humanity there. That kid's 12 and he works at a blast furnace, so some of the stuff was pretty heart-wrenching. Hardest working people, I felt like I was giving it my all, and it seemed like at every turn they were surpassing my efforts. I'm going to go really fast through this. These are scanning electron microscope photos of honeybees that I worked on for like 3 or 4 months for an article I wrote about the colony collapse syndrome, CCD, colony collapse disorder. Where seemingly healthy hives will kind of disappear with no obvious sort of explanation as to why. So these are all hyper-magnified, obviously, images. And they have that silver kind of look to them because in order for the scanning electron microscope to work, they have to be covered in iridium. So they have a silver tint to them. Okay, this is the last photo essay, and then just a couple more after that. So this is something that was really difficult to do, but for a while it wasn't at all difficult to do, and then it got really difficult to do. But this is a really, really dear friend of mine, Brett Kilrow, and we'd worked together for 20 years at the time, and he got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And we thought, you're going to go get chemo and you're doing all the right things, you're eating all the right food, you're exercising every day, so this will go away. So I started documenting his journey through cancer, and there was this repeated kind of motif. It's kind of a leitmotif of the whole thing, was this window at Sloan Kettering that looked out over the East River. And I kind of became obsessed with the window because it was like we're inside the room always. And looking out the window was kind of like, it was almost like you could touch it, but you couldn't, sort of thing. So I shot him in all kinds of, this is a book, so it's like 70 or 80 photos, so I'll do a few. But stuff that we were doing together, that's 4th of July at Tybee Island, where I have a house there. And he would always come down to the house and stay. And just trying to kind of create this picture of our time together and his time as he slowly started to sort of like meet his demise, unfortunately. And there were ups and downs, and there were beautiful moments, heartfelt moments. There were moments where we later on like acknowledged mortality, and he acknowledged his own mortality, and we talked about the project and how far we should take it, and collaboratively we agreed like we should just photograph the whole thing. This is his radiation mask that he had made for him, so they could do precision radiation therapy on him. And his hair started to fall out, obviously. But like things in his apartment and just stuff we would do together, just like this, to kind of create, Stieglitz talked about making, it's impossible to make an accurate portrait of someone with one picture. And I totally agree. I mean, this is a very fleshed out portrait of Brett. I shaved his head finally because so much hair was falling out. And the window just kept popping up, it just became this thing, the window. It's the last time he went outside. They have like a porch out in Sloan where you can go outside and just get some fresh air. I think my wife slept there in his room for like 32 days or something, 32 nights, which was incredible. I was sleeping on an air mattress, but I was trying to juggle jobs. I'd like have to fly somewhere and shoot something and then go back. But she was there with him, kind of like his caretaker. Another window. It's hard to look at this stuff for me. It's my dear friend, but it's also like kind of a grim reminder of this beast that exists out there that has, touched so many people and affected so many lives. My friend Nicole kissed the window one day and took advantage of that. All right, so really quickly, I've like only a couple minutes left, or I guess I'm actually over time. So for me, the hardest, I talked earlier about like lighting and having the great subjects and, styling and set building and all those things, which are great. It's fun. I really like doing it. It's a lot of fun. It's enjoyable. It's interesting to like work with light, et cetera. But I think the most difficult thing as a photographer that we ever encounter is when we're stripped of all of that, and we're stripped of telephoto lenses, and we're stripped of wide angle lenses, and we have a 50, and we go out and no lighting, no gear, and we have to just see. And Bresson used only a 50, and it's really, really difficult to do. So I shot all these with Hasselblad or Rolleiflex, so it's an 80, or I use 100 on my Hasselblad, but it's all a normal focal length lens, no lighting, and just go and make those kinds of pictures. And I'll just kind of go through them. And these are the nearest and dearest to my heart. The famous people pictures are fun, and I'm grateful that I get to do that kind of work, but it's certainly, if I were to identify through images, identify myself through any images, these would be the images that I would want remembered. And then just lastly, this is a series of photographs of I call it friends and family, but it's essentially like a document of my son and people in our lives as he was growing up, and my wife and I. Once again, difficult to do, but very satisfying when it works. That's my dad. And this is my wife, Catherine, who takes care of everything, including me, and I'd be lost without her. So thanks so much. I think I see two right there. Yeah. Yeah.
Black and white or color?
Oh, do I like better? So that's an interesting question because I was kind of forced into color a little bit when I was at the newspaper because we went 7 days up front color, and none of the photographers wanted. This is in the mid '80s, which that was like, whoa, color in a newspaper. None of us wanted it. We had to print, do all our own printing. Process guy would shoot it. Like, color is a beast, you know. Black and white, it's like, you know, I don't want to insult anybody that shoots black and white because I do as well, but it's a hell of a lot easier to shoot black and white because you're not dealing with that other element, which is color, right? You're dealing with value and form, shape. So do I prefer one or the other? Honestly, at this point, I love both of them. Yeah, I really do. I've kind of made peace with it. And it was difficult with the color. Understanding like the color that's in front of you is the color you're going to get, you know. So if you want a color on a background, you got to paint it that color. If you want, you know, clothing to look a certain way, you got to style it that way because nothing magical is going to happen in between, you know. And then if you're shooting wide open in color, you have crazy, wildly varied color bokeh background, which usually looks pretty crappy, you know. So deeper focus works better because you can like really isolate the colors and not smearing into one another. So I would say all of it, but color is a real challenge and was a real challenge. I love it now, but yeah, I think probably both. Yeah, I like them both. And there's one more question.
What does your conceptual process for set building look like?
You know, it's interesting. I think it's like one shoot at a time. And the previous shoot kind of maybe informs the way you think about the next one. And, you know, that Denzel Washington one was kind of my first. It was my first actual, like, set. I had done stuff against, like, wooden backgrounds I'd painted and things like that. But doing that Denzel Washington portrait was like, I'm going to create a world. And no one that's going to see this image is going to have any idea where it was or where it is, you know. And so conceptually, that's what I wanted to achieve. And then later, it became kind of the same thing. Like, I want to put someone in a world because I like the idea of context rather than sort of like decontextualizing someone through a seamless or, you know, which also is great. I mean, seamless is great, totally works fine. But I think the idea of kind of just creating sort of a world, and if you looked at sort of my whole progression of sets, it's kind of a progression of like something similar, like, because I know what works, I know what I like. I know the colors I like, you know, and kind of like the genre and eras that I like. And I tend to like stuff that's much more like dilapidated and, you know. And that Leo portrait, I showed that. I didn't explain it, but the reason I showed it is because that could have just as easily been in a studio. But it was against this crazy, awesome wall that I found at that fort. And there were a bunch of other, from that shoot, a bunch of other of those as well. So just conceptually, I think, you know, it's one at a time, one picture at a time. That's a good question, though. All right, well, I'm really, really grateful that you all came today. It's good to see so many faces, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your experience here. Gabe, thank you very much.
Dan, thank you so much.